I welcome the participants to this session on particularly vulnerable tribes in India. In 1973, the Debord Commission created Primitive Tribes Group, that is called PTGs, as a separate category who are less developed amongst the tribal groups. And in 2006, the Government of India renamed them as PVTGs, that is particularly vulnerable tribal groups. There are 75 groups who have been given the status of a particularly vulnerable tribal groups and have little access to resources. Besides, they have low rate of literacy, small population, and some of the groups are even on the verge of extinction. They are distributed in various ecological zones beyond the state boundaries with immense variations in sustenance pattern, that is worldwide. These PVTGs are more vulnerable amongst the tribal groups. Due to this factor, more developed and assertive tribal groups take a major chunk of the tribal development funds, because of which PVTGs need more funds directed for their development. These PVTGs have some basic characteristics which is important to know and understand. They are mostly homogeneous with a small population, relatively physically isolated, there is absence of written language, relatively a simple technology, and a very slow rate of change. These PVTGs are original habitats of the Indian peninsula, and majority of them live in states like Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, and Tamil Nadu. The Human Development Index on PVTGs reveal that overall status in all spheres is still far behind the scheduled tribes and far behind the mainstream communities residing in urban agglomerations. The educational status of these groups, especially the women, is very low compared to other tribal groups. The health indicators such as infant mortality rates, malnutrition, and certain chronic diseases like leukemia, skin disorder, etc., are very high and prevalent amongst these tribal communities. Due to their lack of awareness, their isolation, lapses on the part of local administration in creating awareness and delivering essential services to these tribes at grassroots level have made them still live in a very vulnerable condition. Now I'll just state some of the PVTGs. They are the Sentinels of the Andaman and Nicobar Island, Birhors of Jharkhand, Ambuj Mari of Chhattisgarh, the Bondas of Odisha, and Cholanikas of Kerala are the most vulnerable and gradually on the verge of extinction. They are disappearing from their habitations. There are instances of PVTGs living in and around reserve forests are targeted and harassed by fringe elements and land mafias. It's important to understand the occupational patterns and lifestyle of these PVTGs. The PVTGs of Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the Great Andamanis and Jarwas, are still aboriginals. The major occupation of these tribes is hunting and gathering. Some Jarwas have also proved to be craftsmen with the skills in making like arrows and metal tools. Apart from hunting and gathering, the Great Andamanis have also started occupations like horticulture and poultry. The main occupation of Nicobaris is pig farming and horticulture. Most of these particularly vulnerable tribes are engaged in different occupations, but mostly are either into agriculture labors, fishing, hunting, crafts making, etc. Better settled tribes also work in mills and handicraft industries, but few tribes like these have their own looms and make clothes for their own use as well as for marketing to some extent in exchange of in changing the economic situation. If we see the vulnerability indexes, poverty is the common phenomenon amongst the PVTGs groups, which lead to hunger, malnutrition, ill health, illiteracy, poor economic activity, etc. In general, most of the scheduled tribes live below poverty line. The PVTGs are becoming increasingly vulnerable due to loss of their customary habitats and the livelihood resources which sustained them due to non-recognition or their rights. This is somehow leading them to remain in poverty, hunger, starvation, malnutrition and ill health, and erosion of traditional occupation which is threatening their very survival. Education, though the literacy rate among the scheduled tribes have gone up over the past decades, from a single digit literacy rate, the figures have increased to 30 to 40% in many of the PVTGs. However, female literacy rate is still considerably low compared to the male literacy. The dropouts rates compared to other social group is very high in scheduled tribes, and it is much higher in PVTGs. The quality of education is also very poor in the tribal areas due to acute shortage of qualified teachers and infrastructure, etc., with the average literacy rate of 10% to 44% among PVTGs. This is largely due to the abysmal educational infrastructure in tribal areas and poorly trained or absence of teachers, a lack of teaching in tribal language. Health status of PVTGs is in an awful condition because of multiple factors like poverty, illiteracy, lack of safe drinking water, poor sanitary conditions, different terrains, malnutrition, poor maternal and child health services, unavailability of health and nutritional services, and also deforestation. If we see the employment level, tribals usually depend on agriculture for survival. Their economic levels is dependent on traditional agriculture techniques which do not yield much income. The condition of PVTGs here are even deplorable. Now, it's important to talk about certain existing initiatives for PVTGs and scheduled tribes by Ministry of Tribal Affairs. The Ministry of Tribal Affairs is the nodal ministry in the central and state departments of tribal affairs, social welfare and UTs are implementing various programs for inclusive development of scheduled tribes. An exclusive scheme that is named as Development of PVTGs is being implemented by the center through state governments, and UTs administration covers the 75 identified PVTGs among scheduled tribes in 18 states and UTs of this country. The scheme covers funding for activities like housing, land distribution, land development, agricultural development, animal husbandry, construction of link roads and installation of non-conventional sources of energy for lighting purposes. Some of the educational programs are scholarship at the various levels of education such as pre-metric, post-metric, top class education, national overseas scholarship, national fellowship, free coaching hostels and enclave model residential schools and ashram schools and educational loans as subsidized rates, etc. To eradicate economic insecurity and ensure financial inclusion, credit facilities at subsidized rates of interest, Stand Up India, Mudra scheme, land purchase schemes, irrigation facilities, etc. are under implementation. The ministry has also improved infrastructure, free housing, land for construction of houses and drinking water, and electricities were also brought in. Priority is also assigned to PVTGs under the scheme of Special Central Assistant SCA to Tribal Sub-Plan grants under Article 275(1) of the Constitution. The grants in aid to voluntary organizations working for the welfare of the scheduled tribes. Apart from the schemes of the government and a full dedicated Ministry of Tribal Affairs which is looking after these particular vulnerable tribes, the need of the hour is to acknowledge the gap between the actual beneficiary and the government schemes. The tribals are usually unaware of what the government is doing for their betterment, and which results in non-participation of these tribals in the enrollment of various schemes. The PV teachers are in dire need of focus and exclusive attention on priority for their protection, empowerment and mainstreaming in view of their fragile living conditions and prevailing socio-economic vulnerability, which is and their diminishing number, which is like on the verge of extinction. Further, the PVTGs require exclusive and special share in beneficiary oriented programs, habitat development programs and reservation in political representation, employment and education. Providing opportunity to these PVTGs in delivering governmental schemes in their habitations would be an added advantage for community participation, such as engaging health workers, the language teachers, food and civil supply agents, etc., promoting commercial cropping, organic farming, honey cultivation, horticulture, fishery, animal husbandry and handicraft in convergence mode or a model. Providing marketing facilities is very important for these PVTGs to sustain and reach the mainstream at par with the rest of the society, especially with the rest of the tribal communities. So thank you participants for this attendance and attention, and I hope this session would have been fruitful in understanding the particularly vulnerable tribes of India. Thank you.